Hey, what's up guys, and welcome to another RLCraft video. So, you want to go here.
Okay. Oh, okay. Oh.
Nah, don't worry, this place actually isn't all that bad. In this video, I'm going to talk about some of the most useful tips for tackling the Lost Cities dimension that you might not have known. Let's jump right into it. First and foremost, in my opinion, the most important tip for this dimension is understanding that there are two difficulties to this area: exterior and interior. The streets of the Lost Cities dimension spawns dreadnoughts, ender dragons, adapted enemies, and just dozens of incredibly tanky and hard-hitting enemies. Fighting in the exterior is almost always a bad idea unless absolutely fully equipped, which I'll explain later. In buildings, however, large enemies almost never spawn because there is simply no room for them to. If you stay in buildings, the subway, or even just caving underground, this dimension is only a bit more difficult than standard overworld dungeons, simply because even the small Lost Cities enemies can pack a punch. To be even more specific though on understanding this dimension, you should imagine the Lost Cities as a completely different game than standard RLCraft. You need to think of it as a survival stealth horror game. On that very topic, the next tip is to max out your stealth in your L menu. While sneaking with maxed out stealth, pretty much no enemy will know you are there unless you are within literally 5 blocks or so from the entity. You pretty much have 100 stealth in Skyrim. This tip alone makes even traversing the exterior streets in the dimension doable, but is especially useful while inside buildings. While sneaking, you can take out enemies with ease and loot just about anything you want. With a luck potion on, luck increasing baubles, luck magnification on your weapon, or even a combination of these, you will get a ring of dragon transformation before you know it. I have found this transformation ring more often in the chests higher up in the buildings, but I found them in just about every area in the dimension. You will move fairly slowly while sneaking compared to normal speed, even if you max out your sneak speed, so wearing a set of silver armor for the 50% movement speed is very helpful, as well as drinking a speed potion if you want. You'll want to wear silver armor anyways to avoid the debilitating Lost Cities dimension buffs, but you don't have to if you're just staying indoors. Sneaking trivializes the Lost Cities dimension difficulty and will get you these wonderful transformation rings. Next up, combat. In the RLCraft mod files, I recently discovered that almost all the enemies in the Lost Cities dimension take 400% damage from lightning attacks. Lightning arrows actually add a significant amount of damage to your attacks, making exterior Lost Cities dimension fighting easier, but also much louder. And this also makes the shock pendant a bit more viable, but taking damage to trigger the effect when many things one-shot you in the dimension isn't very reliable. For interior Lost Cities and sneaking around, 400% weakness to lightning damage didn't seem super useful considering the few ways to deal lightning damage, but then I remembered the arcing orb. And wow, this bauble deals insane damage to these enemies and is super useful for our stealth looting adventure. I changed my arcing orb attack to E for convenience and found it made quick work of just about every small Lost Cities dimension enemy. The large enemies have a lot of health and you only have 100 mana as a base. After you consume 10 mana crystals, you have 200. So the bauble by default only really works well against small enemies in a vacuum. But while sneaking around in the interior of buildings, that is all you're going to need to worry about. You don't even need to hold the attack very long to one-shot most of these enemies within buildings. The bauble also can be used to paralyze enemies if they get too close to you. Just stop sneaking, hold your bauble attack button, in my case E, and then move in the direction you want to dodge. This will release an electric shockwave at your location and perform a directional leap that paralyzes all enemies around you for a few seconds. This can be useful when something sneaks up on you and you need to gain some distance again to continue sneaking around. It does require 30 in mana to perform this dodge though, so keep that in mind. This bubble one-shots, if not two-shots, most small enemies in the Lost Cities dimension, and you don't even need to hold the bubble attack button very long to deal serious damage to these enemies because of their 4 times weakness to lightning. The attack works seamlessly while sneaking and doesn't alert the enemies to their untimely demise despite the large sound that the bubble makes when charging up the attack. Next up, much of the mob drops needed for crafting sentient weapons and armor actually can be found fairly reliably within the buildings. Mini spawners in these buildings will pop out rare parasite enemies such as mandicators, and you need mandicator parts for crafting living cores, which are literally the cores to all Lost Cities item crafting. You will almost never see the mandicators while fighting in the streets. Because of this, fighting in the buildings is actually very optimal until you get the Ring of the Dragons. Once you get this ring, which will grant you fast flight, 25% attack damage, damage, 50% armor toughness, and 25% max health, and you can start hunting those adapted enemies for their specific mob parks and those ancient mini-bosses for their blood tiers, which you will need for sentient armor and weapons. But in all complete honesty, sentient armor and weapons are not really all that insane. A maxed out enchanted Dragonbone Pike is the best melee weapon in the game for fighting at ranged, and a maxed out enchanted nunchucks is the best melee weapon in the game for straight out damage per second. Because these two weapons can be crafted with no Lost City stealth looting needed, I would say that they're better to go for. Now, the sentient bow is the best bow in the game, so you can go for that if you'd like, but the regular Dragonbone bow isn't too far behind. Looting the building stealthily for these amazing transformation rings is more productive than trying to take on these massive boss enemies. If you do want to fight these enemies though, the dreadnoughts go down easier to melee attacks, and the overlords go down easier to ranged attacks. But either way, bows are safe and consistent, especially if you use lightning arrows, which will add on about 50 or so damage to the enemies per shot. It's fairly noticeable. Also, if you use a melee weapon against these enemies, Atomic Deconstructor, which gives your weapon a slight chance to instantly kill enemies, does work against these enemies, making it very useful as the enemies will sometimes spawn as mini bosses with insane defenses and HP. If Atomic Deconstructor procs, the enemy will instantly die. Against most adapted enemies and bosses alike, a maxed out bow is usually the way to go, or a maxed out pike if you want to slap things around but from a safer distance than with nunchucks. But either way, it is nice that these enemies no longer adapt to damage sources in RLCraft 2.9.2, so you can use whatever weapon you want against them, and the weapon should never do less damage, etc., unless there's like a bug or something I don't know about. If you decide to take on the vastly more difficult exterior Lost Cities dimension, make sure to be wearing a Broken Heart Bauble, be wearing silver armor, have flight capabilities, have the parry enchantment on your weapon, evasion enchantment on your pants, and to have the undershirt ability unlocked in your L menu armor section for the ultimate protection. If you stay in the interior, all you will need though is stealth maxed out and ideally some luck on your player to increase your loot luck, and the arcing or bubble to help you make quick and easy work of some enemies. Obviously, you should also probably have a weapon. If you do want some extra sneak speed and guaranteed ability to loot chests with your right click action, because the fear debuff in the dimension will sometimes stop you from doing that, then you can use silver armor. You won't actually need silver armor for looting in the interior though. Golem armor and dragon armor are perfectly fine, for example. Do make sure to still sneak around while inside the buildings though. Ancient dreadnoughts and other strong flying enemies will break through the building walls and attack you if they detect you, so make sure to sneak to avoid that happening. With that, I'm on to my concluding section. The dimension can be unfairly brutal at times. I usually play incredibly passively in the dimension, picking my fights wisely, despawning enemies often by running 100 blocks away from an area I want to loot, and or quickly defeating an enemy or two I need, and then retreating to the skies if I have to. If I don't do that, I risk my armor being broken and having to retreat, which can be annoying. While recording footage for this video, I was playing more aggressively than normal and lost a few pieces of armor in the process. Ranged parasite enemy projectiles in the dimension do astronomical damage to your armor, and the large mini bosses and adaptive enemies can one-shot, if not two-shot, your armor when you get too close. Because of that, I recommend a bow or pike for combat unless you are very confident and have like maxed out nunchucks. Looting buildings while sneaking around is the best way to play in this dimension by far in my opinion. Still, you must be wary in some of the buildings with tight hallways. Having your back against a wall will allow you not to get snuck up from behind. Lastly, be sure to have warp scrolls on your quick bar for an easy escape. In terms of things I did not mention in the video, I noticed in the RLCraft files that the Lost Cities has an area labeled Atlantis and a few other interesting named areas, but I myself have not found such areas or even know if they appear naturally, so I didn't talk about them. Either way though, I do not believe the Lost Cities is a dimension any player ever needs to go. You can get incredibly overpowered with the Ring of the Dragons and sentient weapons, so only go to the dimension when completely prepared for the post-apocalyptic horror game nightmare that awaits you, or you're finally ready for the final boss, a Malgalich that you can only spawn in the dimension. With all said and done, don't think of the Lost Cities as RLCraft. Think of it truly as an entirely different game that was designed to push RLCraft players to their limits via a high-risk, high-reward endgame experience. Overall though, I have full faith in you. The dimension is tough, but you're tougher. You got this, you sentient human being. Go beat up those zeros and ones if that's truly where your adventure takes you. Stay safe and healthy, gamers. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.